I don't have any slides. I'm just going to talk. I was asked to talk just very briefly about some big picture concepts on these themes that are the topic of discussion tonight, and then talk about some of the challenges that local governments face in dealing with them. The first thing I want to point out is that the environment does not completely encompass sustainability. Sustainability is bigger than just the environment. The environment is a fundamental, vital piece of it. It's not all there is. Having said that, the topics for tonight are really focusing on the environment, and that's what I'll focus my attention on. The other thing I'll say is I'm going to just briefly mention a whole bunch of ideas, and then if any of this intrigues you or you want to talk about it more, we can use the panel discussion to maybe flesh some ideas out. The four things I'm going to talk about, we're not really talking about local food sufficiency here tonight. Clean air, clean water, viable ecosystems, responsible resource use. I think clean air and clean water, the key concepts to be thinking about are trying to keep them unpolluted in sufficient quantity and providing adequate access of everybody to them. Those are what we're really concerned about in terms of those attributes of a clean environment. In terms of viable ecosystems are one way to provide clean air and clean water. Viable ecosystems provide filtering functions. They filter air, they filter water, so we want them for that reason. We want them as a source of biodiversity. We're part of a complex web of life. We suffer when we homogenize our environmental base. There are lots of reasons why we would want to keep biodiversity. That's a topic unto itself. And then we also want viable ecosystems as pleasant places to live. That they have an aesthetic quality that we should worry about. Responsible resource use. The two things that pop to mind when I think about that are the three R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. Of those three R's, recycling is probably, it goes in that sequence. Recycling is good, not preferable. Reuse is better, reduce is best. Right? So don't think that just because we're recycling, we've solved all of our problems. Let's try and reuse as much as we can. Even better, let's reduce as best we can. The other concept with that approach is trying to figure out how to improve our waste stream to input process. There's a fellow, oh gosh, I've just blanked on his name, folks promoting the idea of you can use waste streams, you can use the products from waste streams as inputs into new systems, and that's the best way to use a waste stream. Don't just take it out to a landfill and dump it. Use it as a source for composting that you can now use as another productive resource attribute. All of those approaches are ways to conserve vital biodiversity and protect clean water. They're all connected. If you do one, you're heading down the road of trying to do the other things. So those are some ways to think about these attributes of a clean environment that we're talking about. Let me talk about four challenges that local governments in particular face in trying to address these. And they include, I'll list them and then I'll come back to them: factual uncertainties, moral disagreements, capacity problems, and unhappy propensities. Let me go back. Factual uncertainties. The environment, our world, is a complex place. Global climate change, biodiversity itself is a complex concept. There's a lot of scientific uncertainty out there. It's hard to know how to protect the environment when you don't really understand the environmental systems as well as you might. That gives some ammunition for folks who don't want to protect the environment to say, what are you doing? You don't have scientific evidence for what's going on here. That's a difficulty for local governments to deal with. The second aspect of factual uncertainties is pollution. What is it? When does carbon dioxide go from being a common element in the atmosphere to a source of pollution that's causing an environmental problem? How do we know when that's happened? What about arsenic? Arsenic is a natural element in the environment. When is it a toxic pollutant? How do you categorize those things? So there's a factual uncertainty with that. And then another aspect of this is depletion. The environment is actually a pretty resilient receptor of pollutants and is a pretty resilient, it can take a lot of shock. In fact, functioning biodiverse systems have a lot of disruption associated with them. So when is disruption too much and when is depletion too much? There are a lot of factual uncertainties there. That makes it hard for local governments to act, because how do we know when it's problematic? Moral disagreements. Is nature a form of sacred life, or is it toilet paper on the stump? Is nature a source of a life supply, or is it something that we worry about at the expense of jobs? Who gets to decide? Do you get to decide? Does the Planning Commission get to decide? Do the state bureaucrats get to decide? I tell my students, if you have a collaborative planning process and you have it at all representative of the community, you can bet you will have people at the table who dramatically disagree on whether nature is sacred or toilet paper on the stump. And you have to learn how to deal with those different viewpoints, and that's a huge challenge for local governments. I think all of the local officials here would attest to that, how difficult it is to deal with that plurality of values. And then who gets to decide? The third issue, capacity problems. Two broad categories, legal capacity and fiscal capacity. The legal capacity problem is local governments, you local officials in here might not like this, you are creatures of the state. You can only do what the state has enabled you to do. My law students know this. I pound this into them over and over again. They're creatures of the state. They're only enabled to do certain things. A lot of local officials are reticent to kind of step out and do proactive environmental protection things because they're concerned they've not been adequately authorized. They don't have the legal capacity to do it. I happen to think local governments have a lot more capacity to act typically than they think they do or than they're willing to act on, but that's an issue. And then the second capacity issue is fiscal capacity. Governments are highly strained in their resources right now, and there's a sentiment, well, we can't afford the sustainability stuff. We've got other things to worry about. We've got to get jobs going. We've got other things to pay for. I'll push back on that a little bit. I was telling Matt, quite often, energy efficient systems are also less expensive systems, but usually they require some upfront investment that then pay off over time. So it's kind of changing the time frame and our thinking about costs that's really the hurdle. But nonetheless, the concerns about capacity is a huge issue. And then finally, three unhappy propensities: localism, parochialism, and inertia. Localism is the, by gum, we're the local officials, we get to decide, nobody else has a say in this. Does that sound familiar? Parochialism is, that's happening outside of my borders, we don't have to worry about that, which is fine for the community that's downstream of you. It's problematic when the community upstream of you is saying that, right? We're all part of an interconnected system. We can't afford to be parochial. And then inertia. This is the way we've always done it. Why would we do anything different? A lot of this sustainability stuff is really a new way of looking at things, and that's change. And if one thing people, what do people not like? They don't like change. They don't like to see things different than what they've gotten used to. I have to say, and I'm not just saying this because I like Wendy and everybody else here, I think Ann Arbor is stepping out in front of a lot of communities. So, there is a natural tendency to be localist and parochial in inertia, and I'm happy to be in Ann Arbor where there's a lot less of that going on. I think what the things that we're doing here are kind of pushing those boundaries, and that's great. But that's a natural pull, and you have to kind of keep fighting that, and you have to keep thinking broader perspective, how do we fit into the larger system? How do we get over the kind of, if I can't decide, then I don't want anybody deciding for me issues. They really come up as we try and deal with the issues that we're trying to deal with. That was a completely redundant thing to say. Deal with the issues we're trying to deal with. That's all I'm going to say. Am I anywhere close to my 10 minutes? Okay. Whew, success. Thank you.